Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Sean Blackman, co-founder and CEO at Nooks. Sean, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. It's excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be super fun. Well, you have a very cool background, similar to mine in some respects. So talk to me about that, and then, I would say your, story of why you started and how that transitions over.
Yeah, so I don't know, as these things go, weird backgrounds in weird places, right? So originally F-18 background, so was a Navy guy, fly mostly Super Hornets, a little bit more time on the East Coast. But my last job in the Navy was standing up an analytics and innovation unit out in San Diego on the staff of Naval Air Forces, so the Air Boss, 3-star out of San Diego there. So, and the scope of that, basically I got that job because I was simply the biggest nerd in the room. But the scope of that was, hey, how are we using AI, ML in naval aviation readiness problems? And, this is back in 2016, 2017, the Summer, Bullet Miller, Caesar Jericho. And the short answer was that, hey, a lot of the military at that time wasn't ready for AI. We didn't have the data infrastructure. We didn't have the data connectivity, but we were still able to get some pretty cool things done. But that is actually what got me in contact with the broader defense innovation ecosystem. It's where I met my two other co-founders, David Willard, call sign Mud. He was Air Force F-15 backgrounds, Pentagon guy, and then was early days at DIU 2.0 at the time, DIUX. And then Hunter Price is our third co-founder. He was at helped stand up Defense Digital Services, and then eventually Kessel run up at Boston. He was their first CTO. So very basically, in those military and government hats, what we were really doing was getting non-traditionals on contract, right? That was the basic job. And what we found was probably unsurprising to a lot of people who are listening to this podcast. As long as the contract was unclassified, we could generally move pretty quick. But the second it went classified, unless that company had an existing security clearance, an entity SCL, and an existing SCIF, secure facility, we as the government could not give them the work, right? And it's very much a chicken and the egg. In order to build the SCIF, you have to already be on a classified contract, but to get the classified contract, you have to have a SCIF. And that's brilliant. Simply, standard government logic, right? And it's a money and time problem. SCIFs are millions of dollars to build and maintain, yes, but more importantly, years of time to get certified. To get accredited, you may never get IT networks there. And so, really, these companies spend years navigating a very complex set of relationships, contracts, subcontracts, just to get sponsorship to start their security clearance process, where they eventually might be able to build a SCIF, where they eventually, if they're very lucky, might be able to deploy classified IT networks inside of that SCIF. Most SCIFs are disconnected. And so think about that. I mean, especially in the innovation portfolio, they're actually the most challenged in moving quickly on our most important use cases because of this access to infrastructure issue. So anyways, we ran into this as government guys. We were the first Yahoos to identify this as a problem. This problem has been identified for many years now. We couldn't get anything done with it at the time. Mud actually pitched it to DIUX at the time. And the response he got was logical. It was, hey, you're right, that's a huge problem. It's just not use problem to solve, which is it turns out it's nobody's problem to solve. There's a reasons like this. So anyways, that's kind of how we identified this problem set, was through those government roles. I left active duty in 2019. Mud and Hunter went to do other things. I was at Facebook for a couple of years doing some weird things during, within the technology industry. Amazing to see what tech in place like Meta can deploy versus a 3-star staff inside of DoD. I'll tell you that. But anyways, a couple of years flashed, what went by, and then COVID hit. And the world changed. And we actually identified that the workforce scattering to the four winds, it actually became extremely acute for the government that their workforce no longer had access to classified like they thought they would when everybody scattered to the four winds. So we recognized that there was probably a window of time and opportunity to reattack this problem. And huzzah, Nooks was born in 2021 with the sole focus of solving the national security problem associated with lack of access to classified infrastructure. And I swear I'll shut up here in just a second so you can get in a question here. But
no, this is perfect. I mean, this is what we're looking for.
Well, just to put a fine point on it, the basic thesis behind Nooks is that we as a nation aren't getting access to our country's best tech and talent into our most sensitive programs. We're getting whatever's available from those who can access infrastructure. And God love them. The primes make great planes and tanks and missiles, but I don't think it's any secret, to them included, they suck at software, right? There's a whole sector of our economy that's really good at software and AI and ML that is not being currently engaged meaningfully in the classified marketplace, even with all the changes we've seen over the past couple of years, all due to this access to infrastructure issue. So there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to work with government. There's a lot of reasons why contracting is hard, absolutely. But frankly, this is a really stupid reason to lose to China, all because we can't get the people with clearances into SCIFs somewhere meaningful. Otto, you've probably experienced it. There's 10,000 people in the air today who are flying from point A to point B just to access a SCIF, the one SCIF in the country that they can actually, get access to. That is insane. Just the amount of time, the amount of friction, the amount of resources that go into getting around this problem is absolutely enormous. And it's a modeling problem. And the model that the government has been pursuing for the past 50 years is one of bespoke infrastructure, where you have one company, one contract, one SCIF. Well, it's made a lot of sense when there was a couple 100,000 people with security clearances in the US. There's 5 million Americans with security clearances now. A bespoke infrastructure model no longer works. So with Nooks, our concept here that we approached the government with was one of shared infrastructure, right? And it's similar to cloud. Why buy a server if you can buy compute time? Why have to build your own SCIF and go through that time and cost and frankly pain if you can simply pay by the drink, right? So what Nooks does is very straightforward. We go into commercial office space. We'll lease the entire floor. We will build the SCIF under our government contract, which is for classified infrastructure as a service. So the government is accrediting our sites for the purpose of us sharing them with third parties, not so that we can go build a widget. And then you are simply a user of that site. We run it. It's our security. It's our IT at the front door. You simply sign what's essentially a gym membership. And that gives you access to any of the sites that we operate nationally. So a lot more to go into, but that's the basic one why we have a whole bunch of other offerings and ancillary services that we provide. But that's kind of the bread and butter and the basic core. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a huge problem. Lots of challenges with that. So let's just talk kind of your business model. How did you begin the company? Both from a funding perspective, getting the right people, and then moving forward into how did you make this so you could monetize this for yourself as well as make it attractive for the government?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. Like the innovation here is really around the policy and the business model, right? Like a SCIF is a SCIF. There's nothing magical about the SCIF environment itself. It's a box that's protected per regulation. It's how you use that and how you navigate the policy, and then how do you find a business model that can scale this thing nationally. The vision for us is that we have 100 of these things around the country in both traditional and non-traditional marketplaces. So like Silicon Valley, Austin, New York City, as well as 50 or so mobile units that are 8-hour deployable anywhere in the United States within 8 hours. That completely changes who can do classified work from where and how quickly. So that's the concept that we came with this. Getting such a company off the ground is not a trivial thing. We're the first ones to do something like this. There's been some attempts to try to tackle it from like a real estate perspective, where you buy a building and SCIF it out, and you'll do that regionally for a single sponsor. There's been some attempts to do this from like, hey, I have this cool innovation campus. I'm going to bolt on a SCIF to the side and just run it as a thing that's there. Those solutions either haven't worked or haven't scaled meaningfully. So when we looked at this, we said, okay, this is a national security problem. We have to be operating nationally. We have to be operating at scale. We have to, in order to meaningfully change the nature of the game, we have to be doing this bigger, better, faster than anybody has done this before. So that's a hell of a task, especially in startup land. And Nooks is also a weird company. Like, when you talk to venture capital or traditional funding sources, they're pretty thesis driven, right? Their investors give them money to invest in companies that do things like cyber, like AI, like drones, like hypersonics. We don't really fit cleanly into one category, right? We're not a defense company. We don't make weapons. We're not a real estate company. We don't buy buildings. Probably the closest description of Nooks is a defense prop tech, which puts us right in the middle of a whole bunch of theses. So it's been very, very interesting to get this thing off the ground. So start in 2021. We really spent that year interviewing companies, interviewing the government to figure out, and interviewing investors to figure out what is the right product offering, making sure that we had the right thesis. We started really focusing on the policy perspective. So fundamentally, this is, as I mentioned, the problem itself has been identified long before Nooks existed. It's not a demand problem. The country knows we need this. Government knows we need it. Industry knows we need it. This is a government permissions problem. So that's really where we focus. We entered into some agreements with the Department of Defense to get going. We then went through the SBIR program through a couple different avenues. We're currently on what's called a stratified contract out of the Department of Air Force, which has been fantastic. So really taking like an innovation first view to this. What is the policy and security R&D that needs to occur to scale a network of 100 of these things, all operated under a single security technology platform? So really focused on those core innovation aspects of this was what is this going to take? We've also been through 3 funding rounds. So we did 2 angel-led rounds, really focused on folks knowledgeable in defense, knowledgeable in real estate. And then we're about to announce our Series A funding round. We haven't announced publicly who that is yet, but we will hear shortly about our Series A funding round, which is great. So between our government contracts, between our funding rounds, this has actually been quite a bit of capital being deployed towards this, upwards of 100 million in capital in one form or another. So we've tapped into something very important here. And really, the thing we haven't talked about, Otto, is from a financial perspective, COVID just completely crushed the commercial real estate market, right? So there's all this empty space out there. And for the next decade, there's this window of time where we can use that downturn in commercial real estate to solve a national security problem. So that's an important component of this. We're not a real estate company, but we can take advantage of those trends to fundamentally solve the problem in this period of time.
Are you buying real estate? Is that kind of your model, or are you more?
No, actually. So, for us, it's kind of funny, when a lot of people ask us that question, it would be a hell of a lot easier to raise capital to buy buildings than it is for an operational company, right? That's known. It's much lower risk. And we could buy these assets on pennies on the dollars, right? So it's certainly an attractive way to go. But for us, we're actually much more focused on leasing real estate, and for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want to be distracted by the underlying problems of owning real estate. We don't want to be bothered by tenancies and other floors that are not, supportive of our primary business model. So by focusing only on lease space, we're actually to focus solely on the national security problem, classified components of what we're doing. It actually allows a great deal of focus. The second thing is we can partner with landlords who have underperforming assets, and they kind of view us as this amenity, right? Once you have a shared SCIF available in a marketplace, it attracts all sorts of people to that project, right? It's very much a magnet effect. And it's actually pretty similar to what happened in the biotech space about a decade ago. Once they started investing in fractional biotech labs, they saw an enormous increase in the amount of experiments that could be run, patents let, experiments that learn, they learn faster, they fail faster. It was one of the drivers, the primary drivers behind the biotech boom of the past decade. So this is the same concept, just applied to the national security space. So this play actually has been seen, and they were very, very successful in scaling at fractional biotech labs. That is very similar. You have a high upfront cost in a hardened infrastructure in a physical space with a specialized workforce, i.e., people with clearances instead of scientists. So we have some pretty good models to point to say, hey, here's the benefits if you get the permissions piece left.
Yeah, so cool. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, really, you're delivering a service, right? Is the government your primary, consumer customer, or is it more individual companies that need access to this? Like, how are you modeling that?
Yeah, so this is not a government first offering. This is very much kind of think of it as a dual use offering, right? Government, it's shared infrastructure, right? So the whole purpose is that government can pay for what it needs, industry can pay for what it needs, and then everybody wins through increased availability and decreased cost, right? It's a shared infrastructure. So government is participating in this as well. That's actually been part of the harder parts of this, because there's a full bunch of laws and regulations around government using contractor spaces. But it's important that they do participate, because they have these problems too, especially with return to office and GSA cutting back on leases. Like, there's some real problems here, right? So government is participating, but we don't particularly want them to be our primary customer. Our focus is on the national security space, where government is a piece of that, but they're only a piece, right? You have this entire non-traditionals where really we're trying to get after, because that's where the technology and that's where the talent that the government currently doesn't have access to. right? So even when we'll work with all sectors. We work with small, medium, large, non-traditional, traditional academia, government, first industry. There's a generic need for classified access across the country that is currently unmet. And so we see it as common infrastructure. It does make it harder. It's a hell of a lot easier to build for a specific customer in a specific place, but that's actually how we got into this mess, right? If we continue to think about it in terms of bespoke infrastructure, we're not going to be able to move at the speed and scale that is needed for us to win the great power competition that we're currently in.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Who do you, just the way programs are run, it's their, program offices, they kind of control a piece of it. Then you've got the overarching, you got special access program office, in the DoD, and then you've got each service has their own piece, and then each program has their own piece. Who have you found that who are your prime, I'd say, partners or liaisons to drive this? Because I imagine there's a lot of security oversight that has to be changed. I mean, it just, especially on the special access side, I don't know how much you're digging into that, but I mean, that is super tight.
Yeah, so we operate at all levels, which is challenging. Right. So, but that's also like, take the example of a company that's a dual use technology company. They don't know what their next contract what classification level that's going to be at. Right. One might be secret. The next one may be at SAP. The next one might be KSSCI. So we really need to have the ability to scale the entire breadth of that effectively. And I tell you, when we started Nooks, we were expecting a lot of resistance from the security apparatus, just because it's just hasn't been their mental model. And it's kind of been funny, as we've gotten more and more into this, we've actually seen a lot of people within the security apparatus be like, yeah, finally, right? Somebody is tackling this. But I think it's part of the innovation here. Nobody owns this problem. Like, the security apparatus doesn't own this problem necessarily, right? There's a contracting piece, a requirements piece, an IT piece, and a security piece. The reason it's such a large problem is that nobody owns the whole thing. Right. So, and one of the reasons it took a private company to come along and help start to solve this was that we can web weave between all of those various agencies and Congress and funders. And hey, how do you pay for this in a way that government can't? Like, you don't want this just scaled via congressional dollars. You want this scaled via matching public and private funds and creating a marketplace. Right. So what we've ended up finding is that a lot of the security apparatus is excited about this. Sometimes we meet resistance, right? I mean, just folks that are more traditional, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we've been able to demonstrate that what we're doing is actually in accordance with law and policy already. There's already laws on the books about this. Co-use is supposed to be happening. Standardization with ICD 705, which is the SCIFs standards, is supposed to be happening. But there's been nothing to enforce those things, right? Until you look at it as shared infrastructure, there's no reason to do differently than what we've been doing for the past 50 years. There's no reason to share existing infrastructure because everybody says, I don't want to share that risk with anybody, right? It takes something like Nooks to come along and say, hey, we're willing to take the risk. We're willing to focus on just the security aspects of this, right? And really, the pitch to the security apparatus is, sounds something like, hey, look, like right now we have 1,000 companies out there interpreting security policy 1,000 different ways. It's very much Lord of the Flies, right? You hope that it's being done right, but there's no way to actually track that. Whereas when you have something like Nooks, if we can consolidate that demand into regional centers and operate 100 of these things under a single SOP, a single technology platform, and our only focus is on the security, not on go building a widget, right? We're not doing security so we can go do something else. The purpose of the company is the security aspects. That completely changes the nature of the conversation with security. This is actually, they get excited about, hey, like, what else can we do here? What else can we prototype? What other technologies are available? And just to give you a good example of this, the Teixeira thing up in Massachusetts, the National Guardsman who walked out of a SCIF with a whole bunch of secure information, posted it on Discord. This happened last year. It's actually a good example of what we're talking about. Like, this individual was not a sophisticated actor. It wasn't nation state sponsored. He didn't use advanced techniques. This was a kid who did it because he could, and there was really nothing to stop him, right? It was the insight there is that most of our secure infrastructure is very much enabled by training and trust. That's how the system operates today. Well, what if we could do this enabled by technology, where you really can insert the best of modern technology into saying, hey, these sites are more secure than anything else that is available on the out there in the market, because we turn security into a revenue center as opposed to a cost center. Nobody else is incentivized to spend a dime on their SCIF more than they are absolutely required to. We're incentivized to make sure that it is able to be used by anybody with the best of, the security is the product. So we're able to give it a level of attention and focus that frankly, nobody else is.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too, because there are so many, think of all the bases, all the facilities, some of those have been scaled down, but they're still functional. And so now you don't really have the infrastructure support, the people support to run it at a very high level, but it's still functioning. So you can see that where, there's probably like 3 people involved in that situation. And
yeah,
they're rarely using it, but when they use it, they're not current, they're not trained appropriately. And so that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and I listen to this, John, and, a lot of these things, it's like this makes, and, when we first talked years ago, talk about making sense. Like it's hard to imagine someone would say no, other than it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
This is just a logical way to do things. And, a lot has happened in the government in the past few months that, it's crazy out there, right? But I think one of the advantages of an environment like this is that these types of changes, this is when you can actually get things done, right? These are the type of environment where if you're like, hey, this is coldly logical. This just makes sense to do it this way. Can you get the relief that we need to just go scale this thing, knock the doors off of it? So we're pretty excited about what the future holds with this because it just does make sense. And I'll tell you, the problem's actually worse than I've described right now. One thing that I haven't talked about yet is that there's no data for this, hard data, but what we're being told and anecdotally from talking with customers, about 60 to 70% of the SCIFs out there are facing obsolescence. They're under an old standard. The government is starting to require you to be at the most recent standard or they will shut down your facility, which means there is a tidal wave of pain coming to the entire defense and intelligence community around us, both government and industry, that nobody is ready for and nobody has planned for the massive recapitalization. So, really the timing couldn't really be better, right? We have this downturn in commercial real estate that we can take advantage of. We have an environment of the government where things can actually change and this massive pain point that nobody has a good answer for. This is the time where you can really take advantage, say, hey, look, let's go solve this holistically. Let's do it the right way. I guarantee you China is not doing what we're doing to ourselves right now. So there's a real mission focus in if we get this right, we can unlock the best parts of the U.S. economy, unleash the best parts of the U.S. economy on all this problem set. If we get it wrong, then we're at real risk of not having an American future that we've enjoyed over the past century.
Absolutely. So when you started this, were you looking at, I just think of how businesses, MVP products, you're like, okay, we'll just start with, basic secret and expand. Or are you doing it all at once? And then who are your initial, do you have any facilities and who are your initial early adopters and how's that, what does that look like?
Yes, some of which I'm not able to talk about publicly for reasons that you can imagine, but I'll share with you a few things. So first off, we're laser focused on making these sites modern, up to date. Otto, I want you to be able to walk in there and not hate your life as you're doing national security work, right? There's a lot of people that experience walking into, a 30-year-old SCIF. They don't see the sun for 16 hours a day. And, with asbestos falling from the ceiling, right? That is the common experience that industry has and government has, to be honest. Their own facilities are falling apart. Our bases are, look like they're from the 1950s because they are. And we've regularly robbed the Milcon budget to fix this. So there's a lot of what we're doing is, yes, there's a classification component to aspects of it, but a lot of this is about talent and about access to talent and about engaging a new workforce within the technology field that wants to feel like their work matters. And, one of the things that I experienced in the tech sector, we had a joke at Facebook that oh, you want it easy? Go work at Facebook stickers, right? Some product that was okay, some feature that really wasn't, it's nice, but it's not, you got to hang your career on that. You got to hang your life's work on that. It doesn't really feel good if you're mission driven. There's a whole sector of talent out there today that if they were given the opportunity to work on real problems and real mission sets and that matter, that they knew their work mattered, they would jump on it, right? So part of the thought process as we're going into these facilities is hey, how do we make this a cool experience for folks to come in, make it frictionless as much as possible? There's good friction to make it when it comes to classified, but the right type of friction within the system to reduce risk, not the wrong type of hey, this was a miserable experience. So because of that, we've really designed our sites in a way that accommodates that. And so we operate at all, at all classification levels. I will say this, one of the funny things, one of the things we shake our head at a little bit. We thought when we started that operating at lower levels on the spectrum would be easier and lower risk. And it's funny, what we find a lot of times is action and cloud actually experience something similar to this. Sometimes that's not the easiest way to start because a lot of the lower areas have larger bureaucracies and therefore a more diverse set of decision makers. Sometimes it's much easier to start at the smaller end at higher, the higher spectrum, but with fewer decision makers involved. So some of those things you learn the hard way, and you learn like, all right, well, good to know. But I think it does for us like reinforce the need to be able to operate across the entire spectrum of this because companies never know what they're going to need next, right? So and being able to have the flexibility to go to one classification on Monday and another classification level on Tuesday on the East Coast or the West Coast or thinking anywhere in the world is a pretty compelling vision.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We've seen the same thing. So like, if you want to take a cybersecurity product or something and you want to work with the government, now all of a sudden you got to get FedRAMP. But if you skip that level and go straight to folks that require much higher security, they don't need FedRAMP because it's based in there and the whole situation changes and it's much more. There's less, to your point, less oversight, less bureaucracy.
It makes sense, right? Like when you look at it, like it does definitely make sense, but it's also indicative of kind of the broader problem. Like anytime the government tries to get to enterprise level capability, it can really slow things down, right? And like it's made of the best of intentions of like, hey, look, we're gonna give all these authorities to these crediting agencies or whatnot, but oftentimes they get disconnected from the underlying mission of like, hey, the goal is to launch quickly and securely. Not, you can't be zero risk about this stuff. Like, yes, there's always going to be some level of risk. How do we mitigate risk with speed? The safest box is one I can never get into, but that's not terribly useful, right? So one of the things we're encouraging the governments to do is to take a more balanced approach to that and say, hey, look, there's real existential threat as a nation right now. And that includes all classification levels. And you've got to get, past looking at your own 2 feet if we're going to solve this thing at scale.
Yeah. So do you have, how many facilities do you have
So three facilities right now and a couple mobile units. One of those facilities is in Virginia, one in California, one in Colorado, all at various stages of operations, build out, accreditation, what have you. We're planning our next set of sites right now, which is exciting. And part of what these initial contracts and funding rounds do for us is allow us to just use both sides. So regardless of how government contracts go, we can proceed with our plans, which is awesome. Because fundamentally, we have the permissions we need. Now it's about, hey, how do we make sure that we can scale quickly? So
you have worked your way through the policy issues. You have the ability at some level, at a certain classification level, that you're executing right now. Or
yes, and yes, we are. I'll leave it at that. I will tell you this: of all the challenges that we currently see to this, like it's not rocket science to build these facilities, right? I mean, it is. Oh, yeah. It's not easy, but it is doable. The thing that is actually most challenging is not be a surprise to you is the IT environment, right? There are well over 1,000 different classified networks, IT networks out there, none of which are owned by a single agency. These are bifurcated amongst just as many agencies. And the reason there's so many is because it was too hard to work together. So folks just continue to do their own thing in order to move quickly. Again, best of intentions, right? Made complete sense to just freaking go to get the mission done. But now when you look at this from an enterprise level capability and a holistic solution, you're like, holy crap. Like how the hell do you navigate an incredibly complex IT environment where nobody really understands the full thing, right? There's people that understand pieces of it, but how they can all come together is very, very challenging. So one of the things that we're solving for in these early phases is, okay, get capability and connectivity deployed to these sites as quickly as possible. Check. Yes, do that. But also, what is the long-term solution that we can holistically bring in? Frankly, I don't think Nooks is the company best situated in the company to solve the absolute nightmare that is government classified IT.
If
That's
you do, congratulations.
I cannot. That ain't us, right? Like we're good at a lot of things, but that's a miracle too far. But I will tell you that we are the best company in the entire country positioned to host this solution. So as the government starts to consolidate its networks and migrate to cloud, and we get away from physically currying classified information across the entire stinking country because we can't email each other, it becomes more and more logical to host access points for government networks, for cloud, for even corporate lands and WANs at a Nooks location, because it just is, again, logical to run it that way once you have this distributed infrastructure.
Any initial feedback from customers that are using it?
Yeah, they wish that we were in their marketplace yesterday, more marketplace yesterday, right? Like I think everybody's biggest frustration with this concept overall is like, yeah, awesome, sounds great. Once it's scaled, it's amazing. But like this is the hard point, right? Where we have a couple locations where we're getting those initial capabilities online. Hey, we don't have access to all 1,000 networks, right? Like this is the hard part. This is where the chickens and the eggs come about. And, we're not going to be the 100% solution for everybody. I don't think that's realistic, but we do think that we can be the 80% solution across the entire community. And even that is a hell of a task, right? So initial feedback is like, holy crap, this is what we've been waiting for. And honestly, this is an order of magnitude less expensive than these companies building their own facilities. When they start using multiple facilities, the savings are essentially both in time and money. The savings are essentially infinite, and unlocks opportunities that they would not have otherwise been exposed to. So like it is absolutely worth it to go through the pain, but these early phases are where it's tough, right? So we're focused on our first 3 locations are being very supportive of some of the commercial, satellite companies out there. That's very helpful because a lot of that stuff goes classified quickly. But next round of sites, how do we get to Silicon Valley and Austin and Boston and New York and Atlanta, more places in Florida, more places in Texas, where today's talent pool is really located. So everybody's biggest complaint is that we weren't open yesterday exactly where they need us. And I share that complaint. I wish we were there.
Yeah. How are customers looking at it? Because it's an interesting, the way, people bucket money, for example. So you got a guy, a company, and they send him, 2 weeks a month to fly somewhere, carrying his shit, giving it his gift, or whatever the facility is, doing his work, coming back, traveling somewhere else to do something. They would look at that as like, well, I don't need to build my own SCIF because I can do that. So to repurpose that capital into then a subscription model, for example, are companies getting that, or is it still like too much?
Our minimum package is $500 per user per month. It is incredibly inexpensive. And the whole reason we do that is to demonstrate like this is cheaper than an airline ticket in order to fly across the country, let alone the friction, let alone the hotel, rental car, whatever. It is an absolute no-brainer from a financial perspective to do it this way. Now, doesn't mean that everybody is going to say, hey, a server, use Nooks for every single requirement they may have. If they have, like, no kidding, they know they need 200 people in a SCIF for the next decade, and they're going to be there using it all the time, every day, go build your own thing. That makes complete sense to do that. But there's very, very few people out there who have that level of certainty around exactly what they need, where they need it, how long, and how big, because requirements change, right? I mean, your option may not be exercised in your contract. You may have a new opportunity pop up. So what we found is that even when companies have their own SCIF, they generally have a SCIF or 2. We're looking to operate nationally across the entire country. So it unlocks who they can recruit, where they can retain talent. That's very much how the government sees it. It's a lot how the primes see it, and increasingly non-traditionals. Because, if you're large non-traditional, XYZ, you really don't want to go build 10 SCIFs around the country to support a distributed workforce. But if you had access to 10 SCIFs, that's easy, right? Absolutely. Pay by the drink. I call it good.
Yeah, no, it's a great model. It's fantastic and way late to need. But you're right. I mean, the timing matters.
No, we had this conversation the other day. Like we're 10 years later. Like this should have been around decades ago, right? Like this should have been solved. I kind of joke that like Nooks was born out of rage more than anything else. Like this is a problem that should have gone away a long time ago. It just took a company that was solely focused on this problem and nothing else, doing it the right way, aligned with what the government's trying to do, to go ahead and solve it. I know, we haven't solved it yet. I'm not claiming that we solved world hunger, but we
and I think transition to cloud and recognizing that that's the wave of the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. There are pieces there, but
even too, like after Snowden, there was no desire for something like this,
no,
right? Like, the government locked things down and said, hey, everybody out. So even 10 years ago, this wouldn't have been possible. But
Right.
really with, once SecDef Carter, really started saying, hey, innovation, engage non-traditionals, the technology that you need to fight the high-end fight is vastly different from what you need to fight a desert war. And that means working with different parts of the economy, both in terms of where they're located, who they are, and in trying to draw those people in. You've got to look at the infrastructure in a different way too. You can't just expect the rest of the U.S. economy to adjust to what government wants them to do. You got to meet them where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So transitioning from the military, obviously the entrepreneurial world, as we've seen, is very different.
Yeah.
What do you think your biggest, I'd say, skill sets or takeaways are that you took from the military as well as from Meta or Facebook?
Never, ever, ever give up, right? Bad stuff happens. Keep on pushing forward, right? Uncertainty. I think, I think folks coming from military backgrounds can make either the best or the worst entrepreneurs, right? So then hang with me here. It makes sense. The best, because holy crap, an unparalleled level of grit and mission focus and sheer stubbornness to continue to move forward. I think that that is just not it's not like the military has a monopoly on that skill set, but it definitely is to your advantage to be able to say, all right, one foot in front of the other, don't deal with uncertainty, keep on moving forward. I think on the flip side of that though is that the military trains you very well. Like they taught me to fly an F-18. I don't know. They every step along the way, they trained you to be highly, highly capable. And as you know, I don't like entrepreneurship is like, perpetually feeling like you suck every single day, just trying to suck a little bit less because there's no way it's possible to know all the things and to know all the various aspects of this, especially starting off. So in that way, I think a lot of veterans actually avoid entrepreneurship because there's no training for it, right? There's no real training for it. The only real training is going through it. And that can be scary to a lot of folks, and then I think turn folks off. But man, for the right personality, for the right, the right mindset of I'm just going to keep on moving forward no matter what. I think military background's great for this type of work.
Yeah, and you also have, I think the military, like large organizations, when there's a structure, you're navigating your way through the bureaucracy, the capability sets. You have measurable endpoints or, exit criteria, measurable objectives that are already defined. You're not wandering through this mist trying to go, what is the journey? What are my objectives? How do I measure it? How quickly do we go?
So I'm curious on your side. Like, I think one of the things that struck me the most in this whole journey is like the infinite lines of chickens and the infinite lines of eggs that constantly have to be navigated. And you're like, oh my God, like everything asserting dependency on everything else. That's what I've just experienced again and again with Nooks is, if only this happened, people asserting, kind of doing this number when it comes to, this has to happen first versus that. I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, man, but it is a daily occurrence of like, holy crap, chickens and eggs.
Oh yeah. I mean, just take fundraising. It's like, you need revenue. Well, I don't have revenue. I'm trying to raise money. Like you're back and forth of, how do I share a story that can make investors confident? Or right? Yeah, it's super exciting, but very challenging for sure. How about from Meta? Because then you got to experience some of the commercial side. What do you think? What were your big takeaways from that?
Yeah. So first off, I mean, okay, so I was working in the anti-misinformation shop during 2020 during COVID. It was a weird place to be at a weird time. It actually wasn't even the job I applied for. I applied for, and it was an operational analytics management role. And that by the time I showed up, the only thing that was available was this information shop. But I tell you, Otto, like, regardless of how people feel about, the subject matter politically or about Facebook, the company, I was so thrilled to see a group of people that were just so mission focused and dedicated to solving an unsolvable problem. Like, there's no way to solve misinformation. Like, it's the Pandora's box has been open. So a bunch of folks working really hard to do the best they could in a very, very difficult environment. So one, it was great to see that level of technology talent that was interested in being that mission focused. That was amazing. Two was the actual technology itself, right? The ability to train and launch a machine learning model could happen in a matter of days. That would take years inside of the DoD, right? So seeing when everything is under a single data environment, how quickly that you could move was enlightening. And I think the third thing was, kind of taking kind of a product first mindset to things, right? Like it's something that the military has a concept of, but it's not necessarily baked into the DNA of a product culture. It's something that we're taking to Nooks is like, hey, look, this is a product. How do we present this as every part of that experience should be curated and intentional. That's something that comes from a product mindset. More than you kind of mentioned being more than just like, hey, we're not just it's not just a service. Like, yeah, it is a service, but it's a product that you're entering into and utilizing it. We should be able to treat it as such. So very grateful for my time at Facebook. And for what it's worth, I don't think I could have been treated better by a company than anywhere out there coming off of active duty. So I'll always be grateful for that experience.
Yeah, no, that's great. You see one of the leading innovation arms, and these companies like that do some amazing things. It's very cool to see and give you that. I mean, to me, it's a lot of also it's that visionary mindset of, oh, this is how you do things. This is how you can do things in innovation. Without that, it would be tough to walk in and do what you're doing. Just to do, your brain has been trained one way to think through problems, not like in an innovative space.
Well, and seeing the art of the possible, right? I mean, like, one of the things I took away, like I wasn't working in this arm of the company, but just the AR, VR technologies that are, got to get an early look at before they kind of came online, like it is absolutely incredible. And we want to make sure that type of technology stack is enabled at our sites, right? What if you could have, there's some really cool use cases out there of what if you could have this distributed infrastructure and people operating collaboratively in a way that feels natural to them based off of that type of tech. So there's some really interesting things that come from that type of technology.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we're going to have to wrap this up, unfortunately, and I know we could keep talking forever. I look forward to actually getting together and sharing a beer. But if people want to watch this and are interested in using your service, how best would they go about, engaging in this?
Yeah, reach out to our website. It's the best way. Nooks.works is the best way to reach us. We also are on LinkedIn. Reach out to me personally on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with the community. And, honestly, like I don't think you'll find a company out there that is more dedicated to solving this type of head hurter. And just, I didn't mention this before, one last plug. We do a lot of different things. So not only the classified, the primary offering of that gym membership for access to classified, we do mobile SCIF where we operate it and literally can bring it to your doorstep. We have services to help companies through the security clearance process and teach them how to do security the right way. We're helping dozens of companies do that right now. Classified auditoriums, think several hundred people in these large conference settings. I think classified lab and manufacturing is a future use case for us. So your first 1 to 1,000 units of something classified could be prototyped with one of our facilities fractionally, and then as you're getting your full rate production established someplace else. So anything that comes to classified, we can help with. We do stay focused on the classified components, but that's we know that we can help, and we're dedicated to doing so.
So awesome! Look forward to your announcement and your fundraising. Congratulations! I know that's not easy, especially in the space you're in. So.
Yeah, I think that this raise is probably the most difficult professional experience in my life. But hey, it's everybody goes through it. So this is a good one for sure.
All right, brother. Take care, and let's do this again.
All right. Hey, thanks for the time, Otto. Good seeing you.